It was the spring of 1904 when Clara Wynn stood trial in Emberidge, a town cradled between pine ridges and worn railroad ties. Folks there believed in appearances more than truth, and justice came second to comfort. The courthouse stood like a stone spine at the end of Main Street, and on that morning it was filled wall to wall, not with lawmen or scholars, but with townsfolk hungry for a story. Clara stepped through the courthouse doors with dust on her hem and no one at her side. She wore no hat, no lace, no name that mattered. Her hair was pulled tight, and a shadow of a bruise lingered below her jaw like a secret half forgotten. She said nothing, made no plea, only folded her hands in her lap and met no one's eyes. They called her the Holloway girl, or the quiet one from the mayor's house, as if silence was enough to mark guilt. She'd worked for Mayor Emmett Holloway, a man too rich to be resisted and too cruel to be corrected. And now he was dead, poisoned in his sleep, they said, and she was the last person to see him breathe. The courthouse filled early that day. The saloon emptied before noon. Even gamblers folded their cards to come watch the drama unfold. A woman on trial was a rarity. A servant girl poorer than dirt accused of murder? That was a spectacle. And there she was, alone on the bench by the old iron stove. The prosecutor, a man who smiled too much when talking about death, held up a tiny brown bottle and turned to the crowd like a preacher facing his Sunday flock. "This here's belladonna," he said. "Devil's herb. One drop will still a man's heart before his last breath even leaves the room." He paused and then, with a theatrical flourish, pointed to Clara. And that's what she used. Gave it to Mayor Holloway like a bedtime kiss. There were gasps, nods, the kind of noise people make when they've already decided. No one asked how that bottle ended up in the mayor's own drawer. No one mentioned how the old man had grown weak for months, or how the doctor kept quiet behind closed doors. No one questioned what a girl without decent shoes would stand to gain by killing the only man who paid her. She had no husband to speak for her, no father to defend her name. No name anyone remembered, really. The court-appointed lawyer, pale and perspiring, cleared his throat and stood. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "there's no real proof." "That's enough," said the judge, sharp as frost. "You may sit down." A few in the gallery chuckled. Clara didn't laugh. She didn't blink. She only sat there, hands folded, while her eyes roamed the room like someone counting ghosts. She saw the baker's wife, who once offered her rolls warm from the oven, now turn her face away. The stable boy, who used to smile when she passed, stared hard at the floor. And Marshal Dorian Pike, the only man who ever asked if she needed help at the Holloway estate, now stood at the back of the courtroom, like a stranger. The jury didn't deliberate that day. They didn't need to. The story had already been told by gossip, and they liked the ending. As the gavel cracked through the air and court adjourned for sentencing, they led Clara out the side hall. She didn't resist, didn't speak. She didn't have to. Because across town, in a saloon that smelled of old tobacco and old regrets, a man with gray dust on his coat and a revolver that hadn't been drawn in years sat staring into a cup of coffee gone cold. He'd been there since dawn, watching, waiting. When he heard the echo of the judge's gavel roll across the rooftops of Emberidge, he stood up like a man hearing the call of something buried too long. They said justice had been served, but Levi Cross knew better. Clara sat behind the bars of the Emberidge jail, hands folded in her lap, head bowed but unbroken. The chill in the stone walls didn't touch her anymore. She was past feeling cold, past feeling much of anything. And as the town waited for her sentencing come morning, they remembered the girl who had not shed a single tear. They said she didn't cry when they chained her. Not when they pulled her from the Holloway house. Not when they dragged her through the streets like she was already lost. And not even when the courtroom filled with the same people who used to smile at her and now stared as if she were a curse. She wore silence like armor, and that made folks uneasy. "She gave him the poison herself," whispered a woman with a lace handkerchief. I heard she watched him die and never shed a tear." "Cold thing, that one," someone else muttered. "Wasn't right in the eyes, too quiet." No one asked how a girl earning $1 a week could afford belladonna. No one asked why the mayor's will had been rewritten just days before his death, cutting out his own sons and naming a mysterious heir no one could identify. No one asked why the doctor wouldn't speak up, or why the cook looked pale every time someone mentioned the upstairs bedroom. Because in Emberidge, it wasn't about truth. It was about tidiness. And Clara Wynn made things untidy. She sat by the rusted stove while the prosecutor told the jury she was jealous, bitter, dangerous. She never even cried, he said. Mayor Holloway died in her arms, and she just stood there like it meant nothing. From the back, a voice murmured, "That's a guilty woman, sure enough." Clara didn't respond. She watched, that was all. Watched as friends turned their backs. Watched as fear twisted into cruelty. Watched the judge yawn as though this trial was just another chore to be completed before supper. She remembered what Holloway used to say. "You're lucky, girl. Plenty would kill for a roof like this." She remembered how his hand would rest too long on her back, how he'd laugh when she flinched. She remembered the porcelain dish she broke and the slap that followed. How the next day he gave her a coin, saying, "For your trouble." And all of Emberidge let it be. Because men like Holloway weren't questioned. They were respected. Levi Cross didn't head to the courthouse, not yet. He crossed the depot road alone, the saloon door swinging shut behind him. The town was quieter now. No voices raised, no boots echoing on the planks. Only the wind carried what the gavel had left behind. At the jailhouse, the sheriff barely looked up. No words passed between them. Behind the bars, Clara Wynn sat in shadow. And Levi Cross, the man they once called a ghost with a gun, stood facing her, not as a savior, not yet, but as the one man in Emberidge who hadn't turned away. "Evening," Levi said. Clara didn't reply. She hadn't spoken in days, and she wasn't about to start now. "I didn't expect to find you behind bars," he said, voice rough like gravel rolled in whiskey. Still, she said nothing. "I came for answers," he told her, "but it looks like I came for something more." The deputy cleared his throat, nervous now. "Sir, visiting hours..." Levi turned his head just enough to look. The deputy froze where he stood. Then Levi turned back to Clara and said, "I'll be at the saloon come morning. If you want out of this, wait." And with that he tipped his hat, stepped back, and walked out the door without another word. The cell fell silent again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Not the silence of defeat. Not the silence of guilt. Clara sat upright, hands folded, back straight. She didn't sleep that night. Not because she feared what might come, but because, for the first time in years, someone had stepped into her silence and stayed there for a while. The next morning in Emberidge broke cold and mean, like a promise the earth had no intention of keeping. Gray light spilled through courthouse windows, catching dust in its fingers. The trial resumed with the same weightless dignity it had the day before, only now the crowd leaned forward with sharpened eyes. They had tasted scandal, and like all things sour, they wanted more. Clara Wynn was led back into the room, her wrists chained, her face quiet and still, like the surface of a pond just before the wind rises. The iron links clinked like wind chimes in a storm, delicate, haunting. She returned to her place by the stove without a sound, not a glance, not a plea. Whatever thoughts stirred behind her eyes, she kept them buried where no one could reach. The prosecutor stood again, rubbing his hands like a man about to perform a magic trick. He gestured toward Clara with the kind of flair that came too easy to men used to being believed. "Let's not pretend this is a mystery," he said, his voice curling like smoke toward the rafters. She was bitter, a servant spurned. The mayor, may God rest him, kept her out of charity, fed her, paid her. He stepped closer to the jury, voice now dropping to something more intimate, more venomous. And what did he get in return? Poison in his tea and silence on her lips. She didn't scream, she didn't weep, she didn't even try to save him. Then he turned to Clara, leaned just enough to make a point without touching her. "Tell me this," he said. "What kind of woman doesn't cry when the man who gave her a life dies right there in her arms?" And from the shadows at the back of the courtroom, someone whispered, "A guilty one." The judge didn't flinch, neither did the jury. They all sat in a kind of glassy stillness, the kind that doesn't come from uncertainty, but from agreement too early settled. But there were things they didn't say. They didn't say that Mayor Holloway had rewritten his will the week before his death, cutting out his sons and leaving his estate to a name no one dared read aloud. They didn't say that the cook once found blood on the stairs, or that the housemaid wept quietly into her apron every time someone mentioned the mayor's study. And they certainly didn't say that Clara Wynn had once stood outside the sheriff's office, bruised and trembling, only to walk away before knocking. Because in Emberidge, pain was kept private, and justice was saved for the dead. The defense said nothing. He was a man who wore fear like cologne. When he finally stood, his voice cracked like thin ice. "There's no direct proof," he mumbled. "Perhaps it was illness. Perhaps it was a mistake. A heart condition, maybe." The judge didn't even look up. "Sit down, Mr. Blakewell," he said. "We've had enough speculation for one morning." And so Clara sat, unmoved. She had grown used to silence. When her mother died, she was 8. When her father drank himself into the ground, she was 12. After that, the world taught her to walk small, to speak only when spoken to smile only when watched. She had lived in 5 houses before the Holloway mansion, each colder than the last. And Mayor Holloway was no different. He was just richer, more practiced, more dangerous. He called her girl, no matter how many birthdays passed. His hands lingered where they shouldn't. He struck her once for breaking a porcelain dish, then paid her extra the next day and called it mercy. In public, he was a man of principle. In private, he was a man who made her kneel when he drank. She had once thought of running. But to where? And with what? Who would take in a girl with no family, no money, and the burden of a powerful man's secrets on her back? None of it mattered now. The judge leaned forward, his voice weary, practiced. "Unless there are any final witnesses." But no one moved. Not yet. The doors creaked, but only from the wind. The room waited for drama, and when it didn't come, they turned back to the girl in the chair. Clara didn't lift her head. She wasn't waiting, because waiting was for those who believed someone might come. But across town, Levi Cross was already on the move. Dawn came slow to Emberidge, the kind of dawn that creeps in like it's unsure if it's welcome. The sun tried to lift the cold, but the streets stayed quiet, like the town was holding its breath. Whispers spread before coffee even hit the stovetop. "He's back," muttered the barkeep, wiping a glass he'd already cleaned twice. "Who?" asked the piano man, his fingers hovering above the keys, motionless. "Levi Cross," the barkeep said, voice low, as if the name itself could summon ghosts. The piano man didn't ask again. Levi's name hadn't been spoken aloud in Emberidge for years, and now it moved through the town like a warning. Not loud, not fast, just certain. At the tailor's, the sign flipped to closed before the first bell rang. At the bakery, the morning loaves burned black as the baker stared out the window at a silhouette crossing the square. And at the saloon, the barkeep poured a drink he didn't want to serve. No one had seen Levi Cross since the trouble down in Red Willow, since the bounty gone wrong, since the fire. But there he was, sitting in the same corner of the saloon where the light didn't quite reach. Hat pulled low, one hand near the coffee cup, the other always within reach of iron. He hadn't spoken since he left Clara's cell, hadn't moved since he sat down. The coffee went cold, untouched. The barkeep didn't ask if he wanted more. The room didn't breathe. A young man, bold or foolish, no one could say, stepped inside just after 11. He froze when he saw Levi. One glance was all it took. The man turned and walked right back out. Behind the barkeep leaned close to the piano man. "You think he's really here for her?" The old man didn't take his eyes off Levi. His voice barely rose above a whisper. "He's not here for the town. That much is clear." Across the square, Clara stood in her cell, watching a strip of sky through the slit in the wall. The light shifted there just enough to tell time. But she didn't need it. She knew he was out there. She hadn't been told his name. No one had said a word. But she remembered the voice, the silence, the way he didn't flinch when the bars stood between them. She remembered something else too. A name spoken once, quiet, sharp, dangerous, through the wall of the mayor's study. "Levi Cross is a necessary evil," Holloway had said. "He kills, but he don't steal. He protects, but only if paid in blood." That name had settled in Clara's memory like dust in a room no one dares clean. She'd heard it only once, and never forgot it. She remembered the way the staff at the mansion used to hush when the mayor mentioned Cross, the way the air changed, the way they all acted like someone might be listening. One night years back, Holloway had shouted at her for asking too many questions. Levi was in the room then, silent, watching. After that night, the shouting stopped for a while. Then Levi was gone. Now he was back, and Emberidge didn't know what to do with his presence. He wasn't a sheriff, wasn't a deputy, wasn't anything with a badge or a reason. He was a man with a reputation, too dangerous to provoke, too quiet to dismiss. He didn't make threats, but somehow the silence he brought weighed more than gunfire. By midday, the courthouse was full again, packed tighter than Sunday service and quieter than a funeral. The townsfolk filed in with the same hush that precedes a storm, eyes low, hands folded. No one spoke Levi's name, but his presence filled the room just the same. Clara Wynn was brought in for sentencing, chains gone now, but the weight on her shoulders unchanged. She walked with a stillness that unsettled the room, like someone who had stopped expecting mercy and started preparing for whatever came next. The judge took his seat, robes heavy, face set in stone. His gavel rested on the desk untouched. He didn't need it. The silence had already settled like dust on old wood. Marshal Pike stood near the door, arms crossed, watching everyone except Clara. He looked like a man trying to disappear into his own badge. The judge cleared his throat. "This court recognizes the jury's findings," he said. "And in accordance with the law." The doors opened, the room turned. And there, standing beneath the archway like a question no one wanted to answer, was Levi Cross. He didn't rush, didn't swagger. He walked down the center aisle with the calm of a man who had already counted the exits and didn't fear a single soul inside. Clara looked up. Levi stopped beside the defense bench, removed his hat, and spoke not to the judge, not to the crowd, but to the girl they'd already buried in whispers. "She's my wife," he said. Gasps rippled through the room like a match tossed on dry grass. The judge blinked, then leaned forward. "Mr. Cross," he said, slow and cautious, "you're not on the docket." "No," Levi said. "I'm on the record." He reached into his coat and pulled out a worn piece of paper, creased at the corners, faded by sun and time. "Marriage license," he said, unfolding it. "Signed in red willow. Witnessed by 2. Dated 5 years past." The judge took it, read it once, then again. His eyes narrowed. "This doesn't explain her actions," he said. Levi shook his head. "No, but it explains yours." Murmurs surged behind him. The prosecutor stood, face red. "This man's not sworn. He's not part of this case." Levi didn't even glance at him. "You ever see what the mayor did behind closed doors?" he asked the room. Ever hear the bruises? Ever smell the fear on the girl when she brought him his drink? The crowd fell to a hush so deep it made the floor creak in protest. I did, Levi said, and I left because I thought it was done. I thought she'd be safe. He turned to the judge now. I was wrong. That's on me. Marshal Pike took a single step forward. You come here to stir up dust, Levi? I came to stop it from covering the truth, Levi said. The judge looked at Clara. She didn't cry, didn't flinch, but this time she held his gaze. The judge sat back. We'll reconvene tomorrow, he said. I need time to consider. Gavel down. No slam. Just wood meeting wood in quiet defeat. Clara was led away once more. But something in the room had shifted, and the air no longer belonged to the jury or the judge. It belonged to Levi Cross. That night Emberidge didn't sleep. The saloon didn't play music. The baker didn't rise before dawn. And for the first time in weeks, no one passed judgment aloud. They were waiting. Waiting to see if the truth could still breathe in a place that had held its breath too long. At the sheriff's office, Clara sat in the quiet of her cell. She didn't speak, but her hands, once folded so tight they'd gone pale, now rested open in her lap. Not relaxed, not defeated, just no longer clenched. At sunrise, the doctor arrived. Not summoned, not escorted. Just walked through town in his long brown coat, medical bag in hand, and entered the courthouse before the doors were officially unlocked. Inside, the judge waited. Marshal Pike was already there, hat in hand, eyes tired from the weight of silence worn too long. The doctor opened his bag and pulled out a stack of yellowing papers. Records, he said. Medical, private, overlooked. On purpose, maybe. But not anymore. The judge read the first page, then the second. His hands tightened on the third. Bruises catalogued, ribs cracked, wrist sprains. All matched dates when Clara had supposedly fallen or tripped or gotten careless. The doctor cleared his throat. I should have come forward, he said. But men like Holloway made it hard to breathe, let alone speak. The judge didn't speak for a long time. He just nodded. Later that morning, the courthouse filled again, but not with spectators hungry for blood. This time, the seats were taken by townsfolk wearing guilt in their collars and shame in their shoes. Levi sat near the back. He didn't watch the judge. He watched the faces of those who'd whispered, those who'd laughed, those who'd nodded along when Clara was being buried by rumor. One by one they came forward, the cook, the maid, even the stable boy. They each told what they knew. Not everything, no one ever tells everything, but enough to shift the ground beneath the courtroom floor. The cook, eyes trembling, said, I heard him yell. Nights, mostly. Heard things break. Once I saw her shoulder wasn't right. The maid nodded through tears. I tried to talk to her once, but she just smiled like it didn't hurt. And the stable boy, now taller, older, but still carrying the weight of being young and powerless, said, I saw him hit her, twice. Thought if I told I'd lose my job, so I didn't. The judge listened. Marshal Pike watched, and Clara, for the first time since it all began, met the eyes of those speaking. She didn't forgive. But she didn't look away either. When Levi stood, the room went silent again. He didn't say much, just walked to the center, held up a small handkerchief, blue, frayed at the edges. She gave me this the last time I saw her, he said. Told me to keep it close in case I ever needed to remember who I was. He looked at Clara. I forgot for a while, but I remember now. The judge didn't reach for the gavel this time. He didn't need to. The verdict was no longer his to give. It took 3 days for the court to sort through the confessions, the bruised testimonies, and the silence finally broken. 3 days where the people of Emberidge walked slower, spoke softer, and looked over their shoulders more than usual. The town didn't know how to carry guilt. It was too heavy for the backs that had been straightened by pride and habit. They wore it awkwardly, like coats that didn't fit anymore, but couldn't be discarded. On the morning of the fourth day, the courthouse bell rang not once but 3 times. That was the signal. Everyone came. The judge sat at the bench, pale beneath the morning light. There were no theatrics now. No flourishes from lawyers, no muttered rumors from the pews. Just faces. Still, waiting, like the whole town had been pinned to the floor. Clara stood before them. Her dress hung looser now, the fabric worn thinner by time and tension. She didn't hold her breath. She didn't need to. The judge cleared his throat. "This court finds that prior testimony," he said, "was incomplete. It failed to account for evidence now brought forward, evidence that speaks to long-standing abuse and coercion." He looked at Clara then, not with sympathy, but with something more honest, remorse. "We cannot give back what was taken," he said, "but we will not take more." There was no cheer, no applause, only silence. Because what had happened in that courtroom was not justice as the town had known it. It was something older, something colder. It was the sound of a lie being forced to retreat. Clara was free. But she did not smile. She stepped down without a word, walked through the aisle like it was any other hallway, and past the faces that once called for her punishment. Some looked down, some reached for their hats. No one spoke. Levi stood waiting. He didn't hold out his hand, didn't tip his hat. He simply said, "Ready?" Clara looked past him, out to the road where the trees whispered and the world stretched quiet beyond the town's edge. Then she nodded. "Let's go." Together they walked away, not arm in arm, not as husband and wife, but as 2 people who had outlived what Enbridge had to offer. And as they crossed the edge of town, no one followed. Because deep down, everyone knew. They were never meant to stay. They left Enbridge before the sun had fully risen. No one followed. No one stopped them. The air was still, and the wheels of the old wagon Levi borrowed creaked soft across the dirt road like a song half remembered. They didn't speak much on the ride. Words felt too heavy, like they might shatter something delicate between them. Clara sat wrapped in a wool shawl Levi had brought. Not new, but warm. She watched the trees pass, eyes half closed, hands resting in her lap. There were bruises still, not all of them visible, but her breathing had changed. Slower, measured, like she could finally hear herself again. They reached a narrow valley just outside Mercy's Rest, where the land opened up and the pine scent thickened. A place without bars, without names whispered like curses, without the weight of the Holloway house pressing down like a boot on her back. There was an inn tucked against the hillside, more barn than building, with smoke curling from its chimney. Levi helped her down, carrying the small bundle she brought. No suitcase, just one wrapped parcel of everything she hadn't already lost. Inside, it smelled of stew and old wood. The innkeeper nodded without questions. They took a room at the back where the windows faced the woods, and the wind came in clean. That night, Levi cooked a small stew over the hearth fire. He handed her a bowl, then sat on the floor near the window, legs crossed, hat on the table beside him. He didn't look at her like someone who expected thanks, just someone who meant to stay. Clara watched him for a long time before she spoke. "You came late," she said, voice low. "I know," he replied, "but you came." He nodded. "Next time I'll be on time." She didn't smile, not fully, but something near her eyes softened. They ate in quiet, the kind that didn't need filling. Outside, the wind rustled the trees. Inside, the fire cracked soft beneath the kettle. And for the first time in a long, long while, Clara Wynn didn't feel like she had to run. She just felt like she could rest.